Well, it is 1:10 p.m. on the East Coast, which tells me it is the start of our session, so I'm going to get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Relational Organizing session for the Move On Progressive Power Summit, happening this Friday, October 1st of 2021. Happy Friday, happy October. So that you're all joining us today. Deep respect for Move On and the work that you all do. You're part of an amazing community, and it is truly a privilege to be asked to get to chat with you all today. I want to go over a brief agenda. We're going to do some introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about what relational organizing is, go over what you need to think about when you are adding relational organizing to a field program. We're going to talk about the difference between relational organizing and relational mobilizing. We're going to go through a couple challenges. We'll do a recap, and we will try to leave as much time as possible for questions. The learning objectives for session are understand the core principles of relational, understand the differences between relational for mobilizing and relational for organizing, and understand the common challenges in running a relational program. Before we get started, take some time to Move On community. The first one, come as you are, show up as your authentic self, do whatever you need to do that. If you need to turn off your camera, great. If you want to wear PJs, awesome, you'll be in great company. We want to make sure that you are comfortable and that you're in a great place so the summit can be as impactful as possible. Trust your lived experience. You are the expert on others, are the expert on theirs. When someone speaks to their lived experience at the intersection of any identity, trust and believe what that person is saying, even if it contradicts with your own experience. And know yourself. We know that topics addressed at the summit can bring up different things for different people. Stay in touch with yourself throughout the summit, take breaks, seek support as needed. There's a care team booth if you need support processing thoughts or feelings. Please take advantage of the resources that are being offered. Make space, take space. So participants in virtual spaces will have different comfort levels and different ways of engaging. If you find you're engaging a lot, maybe take a step back to make space for others. If you find it hard to engage, try to take that space, even if it's just in the chat. One diva, one mic. So at Move On, and this is something that our organization Vote Tripling stole from Move On, we like to use something called Stack to keep track of who is in line to speak. If you have a reflection or a comment you'd like to share, please go ahead and type Stack in the chat so our moderators can call on you to ask your question. And we ask that you please remain on mute until you come up on Stack and are called on to share. Using the chat, use it. Feel free to share how the session topic relates to your personal experience and your community. Share the campaigns or the projects that you've worked on that relate to the session topic. Connect with other attendees who share your interests and concerns. And finally, ask questions to the presenter or the other session attendees. At the same time, please don't use the chat to promote your organization or business. Share information that is not session content or to send the same message repeatedly. So with that, we're going to get started with very brief introductions. My name is Marisa Kanof. I'm the Director of Partner Success at votetripling.org. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia. I have about a decade or so of campaign experience. I'm an alum of both the Barack Obama re-elect in Ohio in 2012 and Hillary Clinton's campaign in Michigan in 2016. Votetripling.org is a kind of research and implementation organization. We use behavioral science to design and mainstream tactics to both help Democrats win, as well as to help amplify the power of historically disenfranchised communities. And with that, I'm going to ask Alfredo to introduce himself.
Alfredo Hernandez, associate at votetripling.org. My pronouns are he, him. I joined Vote Tripling in 2019, and before that, I did a few kind of here and there political consulting work and actually worked in the UK Parliament. And so that's kind of my background, and I want to throw it back over to Marisa to get us going.
Awesome. And thank you, Alfredo, for prompting me for my pronouns. My pronouns are she, hers. So what is relational organizing? Before we get into the formal definition, feel free to put in the chat what you think it is. And I guarantee you that there are no wrong answers. I will also start with a spoiler alert that relational organizing is organizing. At least that's how I think about it. But go ahead and put in the chat, see what other people think. And I'm gonna move on to the actual definition that I found the most. folks don't know, the OFA, which is either Obama for America or Organizing for Action, depending on when you joined it, they have put all of their past trainings online. They also have some information about relational organizing. And this is the definition that I got from their trainings. So it's relational organizing is simply the practice of leaning on the people you already know, your friends, your family, your peers, to mobilize and build sustainable collective power. So practically, this means relational organizing is just asking volunteers to talk to their friends and family about voting, about issues, and about elections. And as an example, vote tripling, which Alfredo is going to talk about a little bit more later on, is relational organizing at scale. It's actually more relational mobilizing at scale. But what we found with a lot of great partners, including MoveOn, is that we were able to last cycle generate 7 million relational contacts with our simple kind of relational mobilizing at scale. But back to the organizing part about it, the reason that it works is because you're tapping into the most fundamental part of organizing, which is just relationships. And then relational organizing leverages that power inherent in personal relationships. And the best way to think about this, and this is another thing folks can put in the chat, or maybe do a smiley face, who here has ever gone to a new restaurant because their friend asked them to, or maybe tried a skincare product, or checked out a TV show or a book or a movie. Chances are you did those things because you trust the recommendation from your friend or your neighbor or your pastor or something like that, right? They have vouched for that thing, and therefore you ignore any external noise about it. Just trust that your friend knows what they're talking about. It's basically the same thing with politics, right? In a saturated media environment with ads and ads and ads and mail and mail and mail, and particularly the disinformation wars that we have going on, who delivers your message is just as important than what your message actually is. So you're basically taking advantage of that trust that you already have in a personal relationship to deliver a message about elections or voting. So the key takeaway here is that relational organizing works because you're tapping into that power of the trusted messenger. The next two slides are graphs from the Analyst Institute. I'm sure a lot of people on this call are already members of the Analyst Institute. If you're not, the way that I like to think about it is they do science behind political. They're the ones running all these experiments about what actually works to help people register to vote, help people vote, persuasion, kind of all that great stuff. This is a copy of a slide from their meta-analyses, which are kind of like a, if you will, about turnout effects by mode for the terms. You can see that relational is kind of on top here. It's one of the most effective things, when compared with digital ads or phone or mail or TV. A couple notes on this graph, if folks aren't already familiar. Warm versus cold SMS. Warm means that you have opted in to receive a text message. Cold means that you haven't. And if folks are wondering what mail SP means, that just means social pressure mail, kind of like we know everyone in your neighborhood is voting, you should too. The Analyst Institute, has also figured out that relational was the best of the best when they did their meta-analysis of 2020 turnout findings. A quick caveat that I will give to both of these slides, that these don't mean that you should only do relational, right? Like mail and phone and digital, canvassing, SMS, TV, robocalling, it all has a place in the work that you're doing. And the best field programs are the one that find a way to make all of these things complement each other. At votetripling.org, we know that relational can be a significant value add to the work that you're already doing, kind of reflected on this. It's also a really, really great chance to get creative. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions on that are worth calling out in the chat or maybe answering live? Alfredo, any of the other moderators, anything I should address?
Marisa, there's a question from Paul that says, in many ways, relational organizing can be seen as preaching to the choir. Shouldn't it be focused on wavering people? And if so, is it a different approach as needed?
Paul, to clarify, are you kind of asking about relational persuasion? I'm gonna assume that you are, so forgive me if you are not. But I think one thing that we have found is that people like us on this call, right? We're activists. We're plugged in. You're attending a Move On Summit, on the first day of October, on depending on where you are, a gorgeous Friday, right? We, I think, as activists in the community, overemphasize how much other people are tuned in to kind of what's going on with politics, and it means that we're actually probably not the best barometer of even friends and family are thinking issues. But that's why, talking to your friends and family about these issues can be so impactful, because chances are, as an activist, you have that trust on these issues. And the great thing is, with relational organizing, is you don't have to establish that relationship, because it's inherent and you have that trust built in that lets you to have more authentic conversations that can then hopefully, if you have a great conversation with a non-activist friend, maybe then they go have conversations with their non-activist friends, and you're kind of the start of the node that gets that message out into the community. I hope I answered your question. If for some reason I didn't, I will be sure to address it at the end of this session. But I do want to move on to be conscious of time. So relational organizing and field, there's kind of 5 core principles of relational organizing to keep in mind. The first, and arguably most important, is that personalization, right? You know how to chat with your friends and family members, and whether that's about movies or TV or shoes or sports, you should do the same way that you chat with your friends about those things is how to talk to your friends about politics. If you never in your life have texted your old college roommate, maybe you guys are phone people, why on earth would you then start texting them about politics? Same thing. If you and, maybe your coworker, you have a weekly Friday lunch where catch up and talk about things, that would then be the most natural time to bring up issues about politics. The authenticness of your relationship is what you're leveraging, so you have to keep it authentic when you transition to talking about politics and elections. Networks, and I know Move On, the summit, has some great networking opportunities. You can go beyond just the typical people, on your speed dial, if you will, and think about what groups are you really a part of. Are you a member of a faith community? Are you a member of a volunteer group that, does adult literacy? Are you a member of like a Save the Whale type of thing, kind of whatever it is? There's various different groups that you might not even be aware that you're a part of, that you can kind of take advantage of relational organizing, and we're going to go through what that looks like in a little bit. Again, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Relationship building, good relational organizing, a good conversation just builds on the quality of the existing relationship. Sending spam texts to your friends, that's not what. A great thing about relational organizing, as opposed to traditional kind of mobilizing tactics, I'm sure we've all done GOTV, where let's get out the vote, where we're just asking people, can I count on your vote, right? That tends to be very transactional, where you might be a stranger going to a door. We don't have an established relationship with that person, but we're just asking them to go vote. A relational conversation kind of flips that on its head, because you're starting with trust and then bringing in the thing that you want the person to do. And then finally, high quality training. I will say there's a ton of room to get creative and with how you go about and train on it. It's always great to let people be creative out in the field. These are people in their life. They know what's going to get a reaction out of them. And when you're training folks, I encourage you to kind of, really give people leeway in the best way to go about running programs like this. A couple of considerations to think about when adding relational organizing to your program. How much time do you have? Are you starting a year out? Are you starting a month out? Are you in organizing or you're in mobilizing? And we will talk about those things. What's your community and district like? Are you in a tight urban environment that's just like a state house race? Are you in a massive congressional district? Like, I haven't actually looked at the new gerrymandering lines, but my understanding is like a Texas 23 runs from basically El Paso all the way to Brownsville up to almost San Antonio. It's like this huge, massive rural district. Are there groups that you can take advantage of? Is there a college in your community? Are there a lot of young people? What's it look like? Are you and your voter tiers and your volunteers tech savvy? Great relational apps out there. Reach is one, Spoke is one, I think Outvote is one. I know there's a ton of other really great ones. I think there's definitely space for apps with relational, but if you're not tech savvy people, maybe you just want to try something simpler like pen or paper, right? No need to force tech if it's not something that's going to work in the area that you're working. And then perhaps the biggest thing to consider is how are you going to measure your impact? I don't know, I'm assuming folks on this call have used VAN or something called PDI if you work. Actually not great at keeping track of relational, but what you have to decide is like what data points matter to you. Is it you've asked to vote triple? Is it the number of friends somebody has said they've contacted about your candidate or your issue? You kind of need to decide what's most important, and then you need to figure out how to track those metrics accordingly. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then, of course, training. Train. No such thing as too much training. I think the key thing with training is if you train and you send people out to go do the thing and you're not getting the results that you want, make sure that you have debrief as part of your training and then tweak the next training that you're going to do to incorporate maybe what didn't go as well as you thought. Alternatively, if you train a bunch of people and someone comes back with a great best practice from having done the work, go ahead and incorporate that into your next one. So now we're going to differences between relational for organizing and relational for mobilizing. So relational organizing, or what you can also call capacity building, right? This is the depth part of your campaign. This is where you start building your base, where you start building long-term power. You can almost do this whenever. The key thing is to do it early and do it. These are your one-on-ones. These are your house parties and your house meetings where maybe you're introducing people to an issue or a candidate or a cause that you care about. These are your community events and your town halls. These are your meet and greets. This is where you really get to know people about, what are their values? What has brought them to the cause? What do they care about? How do they see themselves involved in this space? What are challenges that they face? This is where you really establish community that hopefully is going to stick around for the longer term, well beyond just the, crucial, but like we mentioned, somewhat transactional part of a campaign or election, which is that get out the vote phase. And this is now an example that I have also shamelessly stolen from the OFA legacy trainings about how to really think about that capacity building and that base building. If you think about your network, whether that's your kind of, really close friends and family, extending out a little bit to, to your colleagues or people you volunteer with, or maybe it's people in your religious life, kind of whatever it is, chances are they fit into one or more of these circles, right? People who share your values, people who don't always vote, and people in priority districts and states. And obviously there are some people who might just be in one of these circles. There are some people who might be in two. You might even have people kind of in the nice purple in the middle, the intersection of the red and the yellow and the blue. When you start thinking about the type of relational asks that you want to make of people when you're engaging them in relational organizing, it kind of helps to think about, well, where actually are they in this circle? And then how can that affect what you might ask them to do? And this is literally just a screenshot taken from a Google sheet. But one thing that we recommend is actually friend mapping as an activity. Something you do on your own. If you work for a nonprofit or a campaign, something you can ask every staff to do, something you can ask your volunteers to do. Really spend 30 minutes to an hour thinking or maybe 10 people in your network that again fit into one or more of these circles. And then how will you reach out to them and what will you ask them for? So really simply just starting with, choose the name of the person in your network. How are you going to contact them? And again, going back to the authenticity of the relationship, this should be how you actually talk to them in real life. When are you going to contact this person? Are you seeing them at lunch? Have a weekly phone call. My brother, I have a twin brother. He has been literally having weekly Sunday chats with his best friend from high school. That's very authentic. What issue or value are you going to connect with about this person? Are you part of a campaign to maybe get a coal plant shut down because you both care about climate change? Is that something that you're going to connect with them on? Alternatively, are you really concerned about healthcare enrollment with the expanded Obamacare windows now that we have President Biden back in office. What is that thing that you are going to share with that person in terms of how you're going to connect? And then what are you asking the person to do, right? If we're hanging out with these people in yellow who share your values, maybe you're going to ask them to come knock doors with you. Maybe you're just going to ask them to do this friend mapping activity. Alternatively, if you have these people in this blue circle who don't, maybe you're going to ask them to vote early. Maybe you're going to ask them to request a vote by mail application. Maybe you're going to ask them to mail back that vote by mail application. It really depends on what you think is best tailored to that person. And then, of course, if you're doing all this outreach, you should track your follow-up. If your request was to go ask your vote early, and maybe you do that tried and true GOTV, you made a plan with them, right? You don't just ask them to vote early, but you ask them when they're going to go and how they're going to get there, and if they're going to bring anyone with them. Maybe if they tell you like, oh yeah, I'm going to go next week after lunch, maybe the next day you follow up with them and you're like, hey, you actually get out and early vote like you said. If you don't get the result that you want, you can then figure out if you're going to go ahead and try something new. But we find that if you really take the time to do this as an activity and think about it, you can really start mapping what you can ask and achieve from your network. I'm going to pause for a minute and then go to Alfredo to see if there's questions that folks should answer, and also I'm going to let Alfredo take the last part of this presentation.
So we have a few questions. One is relational organizing different from deep canvassing? I feel like this would be a fun one for you to answer.
I would say yes. That's my short answer, yes. My longer answer, yes. And my understanding is that deep canvassing still uses a targeted voter list, and sometimes, but not always, capitalizes on it doesn't capitalize on an existing relationship. My understanding is that deep canvassing is also a lot more about persuasion. I think deep canvassing can be a part of relational organizing. So if you're deep canvassing and you start to establish that voter, if you continually go back to the voter's door, then you've built that relationship. I think deep canvassing on its own is not, but I think it can be complementary, and it can be a bridge to relational. Great question.
Another question is, will the slides be available? And it seems like the slides will be available along with the recording. So all of y'all asking for slides, hopefully that is helpful. I guess a clarification, they'll be available as a separate file. I guess that is a move on question, I'm sure. Anyone to move on want to answer that one real quick? And I'm also checking to see if there are other questions. If not, I will get my spiel started.
Awesome.
Oh, let's see. Scripts. Gabriella, could you expand upon that a bit? I guess in the meantime, well, Gabriella, if you wouldn't mind expanding upon your scripts, I want to take this opportunity to kind of plug some opportunities for you all. When it comes to doing this wonderful work, as Marisa was talking about, relational organizing, and I'm going to talk about relational mobilizing. Oh, okay. We will. Okay, so there's an open question to the vote tripling team, of which I don't think I have the authority to respond yay or nay. If we can share the slides, I think that is something that is above my pay grade, and so I will leave that to my boss to find out, Marisa. So
I do not see why we would not be able to share these. So we're gonna err on the side of yes, we can share them.
Cool. Let's err on the side of we will be able to share the slide deck with you all. Sorry, back to my plug. So there is a mobilizing community as part of Move On, and actually, let me pop the link into the chat real quick. If you're looking to get involved with another kind of highly engaged group of Move On members who have either hosted events, have done other forms of relational organizing, have run phone banks and done, all that kind of wonderful stuff, please click that link. and make sure to sign up. Oh, okay, hold on. I can't be heard. So what I meant is sharing enabling language and discussion that empower rather than transactional. You can impact kids' health. So versus can I have your vote?
So
yes.
To confirm, the question is about script language for relational as opposed to like a more transactional conversation. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I think the answer there is it's not so much of a script as just whatever feels the most authentic to you. Because again, the key to relational is that you are building on that existing relationship and the trust that you already have. So whatever way you would like normally talk to your friend or your grandmother or your bingo buddy, that's exactly how you would talk to them about elections.
Great. Okay. In the interest of time, so just reiterating what I mentioned, that moveon.org/mobilizers is a really good way to get involved with other folks in the in the Move On community who are doing a lot of this relational work that we are discussing right now. And so with that, Marisa, would you mind switching to the next slide?
Yes.
So as Marisa was talking about relational organizing, I'm going to talk a little bit more about relational mobilizing. Whereas instead of focusing on that like one-on-one interaction with the individual, it's really trying to think how can we marshal all of the relationships that we've spent time building over the course of a campaign or a cycle and have them reach out to their friends and family members. Do that other step removed so as to be able to scale relational organizing. So we're all somewhat familiar with the forms of direct voter contact that we do throughout a cycle: door knocking, canvassing, phone banking, text banking, GOTV. And if we've worked on these before, we know that sometimes the goal of the conversation on the door is to find out whether that voter is a supporter and will either volunteer or vote or do something themselves, right? But a really cool way of thinking about relational mobilizing is seeing that interaction as much more than simply getting the ID or getting the volunteer ask out, but saying it's like, hey, you know what? I trust you as a supporter for my cause. Can you also reach out to your friends and family members and get them on board as well? And if you start thinking about it, this is a really good way to get to be able to get these conversations at scale. Because let's say I knocked on Marisa's door and she said she's a supporter. There's no guarantee that I can knock on her 3 friends' doors, but I can count on her reaching out to her friends and family members and ultimately getting that message out to a wider audience. And that's something that we at Vote Tripling are basically base our everyday around, and we do that in a variety of fashions. So the first is what we call Vote Tripling pledge collection. So anytime you're reaching out to a voter, be that on through text, through phones, at the doors, not only are we asking them to support our cause, but we're asking them if we can count on them to remind 3 of their friends to vote. We collect that information in what we call a Vote Tripling pledge, and then we send them a timely reminder as it comes closer to election day. And that's what you see in that middle there. That text that text message is a version of what a voter or a supporter would receive after they've pledged to vote triple. And then what we see on the right is what's called polling place vote tripling, of which I'm going to be leading a session earlier. But that's really shrinking that whole process of pledging and reaching out to friends to a single interaction. So voters are coming outside of polling locations. You're when they're feeling the most excited, and we're asking, hey, thank you so much for being a voter. Can you pull out your phone and text 3 friends right now? And leveraging those connections immediately. And so as you kind of think through your field plans and you're thinking through how you're going to be reaching out to voters, don't shy away from using every interaction, every conversation with voter as an opportunity to have them reach out to their friends and family members as well. Because that's really how you're able to do relational mobilizing at a very large scale. Next slide, Marisa. Now, as was kind of mentioned, relational organizing isn't without its challenges. And one of the, I guess, kind of the overarching challenges is that you're tracking something, if you are tracking data, something that's a little bit less clear. So going back to the friend mapping exercise that Marisa mentioned, let's say you're having a bunch of supporters or volunteers doing friend mapping, what's the piece of information that you want to track? What's the piece of information that you want to set your goals around, right? Is it number of volunteers that did friend mapping? Is it the number of friends that they said that they'd reach out to? Is it the number of friends that they actually reached out to? Is it the number of in-person relational of volunteering opportunities that we have, the number of shifts for that, it's a little bit less clear. And so because it is unclear, when you're setting up your field plans or when you're thinking through how you want to do this, you want to spend a little bit more time thinking through what's the piece of data that I want to track. And not only tracking, but also setting goals around. Because what we find is that a relational program is only as successful as it is prioritized. So if you're able to set goals around, let's say, relational contacts or relational conversations or polling place vote tripling shifts, you're able to evaluate the impact that your campaign, your cycle is having, and that your volunteers are able to do. And with any form of data tracking, it's the collecting and managing of that data and really training your volunteers for success. A lot of folks are really familiar with the standard forms of direct voter contact, be that phone calls, be that text messaging, be that canvassing. But folks are a little bit less comfortable or maybe a little bit less trained in asking voters to reach out to their friends and family members to go vote. So it's really just kind of thinking about the fact that we're asking folks to do something that's one step removed and really training your volunteers to be as successful as possible when they're having these conversations is one of the best ways to make sure that you're getting over that hump. Next slide, please. And so to really kind of recap a lot of things that have been mentioned is that what matters, well, at least what we find at the end of the day, is that the messenger matters a lot more than the message, right? It's that leveraging those warm contacts. It's leveraging that trust that folks have in their friends and family members and using that for an electoral message. The other thing to note is that relational really complements any sort of field work that you're doing. Anytime that you're talking with a voter, you can be talking to them about reaching out to their friends and family members as well. And that's a really, lightweight way of being able to scale the impact and the reach that you're having with every bit of work that you do. And the last bit, that there's opportunities for relational everywhere. So Marisa and I and the rest of Vote Tripling just spent a week, doing a bunch of, relational voter mobilization work, across Virginia, a variety of ways, be it on canvassing, be it high traffic pledge collection, be it during voter registration. Anytime that you're talking to voters, again, I know I've said this a lot, but anytime that you're talking to voters is an opportunity to get them to pledge to remind 3 of their friends to vote or to promise to have those relational conversations. So there's a lot of pros, but there are also some cons. I don't want to say that they're cons. They're just, extra challenges to think about. Is that data tracking is a little bit more difficult because relational organizing is something that exists outside of, the normal ways that we think about political data and tracking that political data. The second is that the reach of relational organizing is really limited to those existing networks, right? It's the fact that my mom is someone that trusts me is the fact that of why me reaching out to her is so powerful, right? Me reaching out to a stranger on the street isn't going to have that same effect. And so the amount of people that we're able to have these impactful conversations for is a little bit more limited. And the last thing is, it's not so much that tech is a double-edged sword. It's just that technology sometimes, is designed to do one thing, and maybe that thing isn't relational organizing. There are a bunch of fantastic relational organizing apps that exist out there. And so it's really just figuring out what's the piece of data that you need to track and what's the type of relational organizing that you want to do, and finding the piece of tech that best suits those needs. And so with that, I think we're going to turn it over to Q&A, and I'm going to stop talking and let Marisa answer some questions.
While the questions are being generated in the chat, I do just want to plug sign up to volunteer, moveon.org/2022. A lot of really important stuff happening in 2022. Maybe you can use some relational tactics to get people who might not normally volunteering to volunteer. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can answer any questions that folks might have in these final minutes.
Question in the chat from Miranda. Do these tactics work with causes that don't necessarily have a very clear ask, goal, outcome? For example, instead of asking folks to turn out to vote, voting or candidate, what if we're working on a broader area that requires repeated actions by large numbers of people for months to years? Does relational organizing require a very clear ask with a clear goal or outcome? Marisa, do you want to take that one?
Try. Great question. So which means I'm going to give you a classic lawyer answer, which means it depends, right? I think it can. As we know, a lot of things take time, and I think regardless of whether you're working on a program with a very clear like, go vote for this candidate on this day, or whether you're trying to build a lot of support maybe to get a bill passed in Congress or a state house, which we all know can take many, many, many cycles. At the end of the day, leveraging the power of relationships is what's going to garner you more support over time for the thing. So you just have to figure out how relational is going to fit into that. And to Alfredo's point, what data do you want to track? On some level, you can even to list build, and if you have volunteers who are like dedicated to the cause, it's just making sure that you have a plan to follow up with those people who need that repeated message from that trusted messenger. Great question.
Yeah, and like let's say you want to organize a march or something like that, reaching out to your volunteers and like, hey, can you bring 1 or 2 people, or can you talk about 2 people maybe coming and joining this thing? You don't necessarily need to have, as Marisa mentioned, that like singular end goal of an election. Anytime that you're doing any work, you can ask folks to reach out to their friends and family members, ask them to have these conversations, ask them to tag them along so that they become integrated, and then you're able to ask them as well. There's always opportunities to do relational organizing, because it's really just kind of relationship building. It's as Marisa says, relational organizing is just organizing. It's being really intentional with the way that you're speaking with folks and asking them to think about how they can have an impact beyond themselves on their friends and family members. Hopefully we answered that one. Do we have any recommendations for relational organizing apps? We have. That's we short answer is no, because we think that they're all wonderful and they all serve different purposes. So I think it's really drilling down to what are the pieces of data that you want to track, and what's the end goal, right? How comfortable are your volunteers with using certain technologies? Some are, a bit more intuitive but may not be able to track as much data. Maybe some are a bit more, or a bit less intuitive, but can track that more complex data that you need. So I think it's a case of, and to steal Marisa, it depends. It's a function of what you want to do with that data, and really kind of searching on that. I feel like there's lists of the apps that exist. I don't have them, but they exist out there. So if you just look up relational organizing app on Google's, I think you can get a pretty good list of it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Vote Tripling. I have a broad familiarity with them, and I'd be more than happy to answer some questions there.
I'll just add that I think a website called The Acronym actually has a list of not just relational apps in the space, but kind of like all possible campaign tech and apps, and they kind of rate them across a variety of categories. So it's possibly a way to help you figure out what may be the right thing for your program. As Alfredo said, they all serve their purposes. They're all kind of wonderful in their own ways. I will say that I personally like Reach, but that doesn't mean I don't like the other ones. So, great question. We have about 2 more minutes. Alfredo, can you get us one last question to answer?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, I'm going to answer 2 questions, but cheat with one of them. So Carmen asked, at polling locations, how do you know we're talking to persons who vote blue? There is a session on Polling Place Vote Tripling, which I'm leading, which will answer that question. So that's more of a shameless plug than a response. Quick response, use partisan filtering, stand outside of the electioneering limit, say, okay, trying to get more Democrats out to vote. Can you help me get more Democrats? That usually gets people that don't want to get Democrats out to vote out of the way. And the other one's, any advice for letter writing campaigns, Marisa, as it pertains to relational organizing?
Using relational for letter writing campaigns. As someone who used to work with Vote Forward and has massive respect for the work that they do, I know that we had some volunteers when they were writing their letters for Vote Forward, they would include as part of their why they were encouraging the voter to go vote. They would just include that I think this is probably an area that needs a lot more study, but I think part of the reason Vote Forward is so successful is because you have that handwrittenness, which feels a lot more intimate than like a text or something like that. And I think even making some sort of relational ask in a letter like that, and are there people? Can I count on you to remind other people to vote? I know that when I was working with Vote Forward in a previous life, we had volunteers do stuff like that. Alternatively, feel free to use relational tactics if you map your friends to get people to join you in writing letters, because that's fun and it can really make a difference. So We, I believe, just have 1 minute left. So I just want to close by thanking everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you learned some stuff. Contact@votetripling.org if you want to follow up with either of us. Thank you all for the work that you do. You're part of an amazing community. It's truly been an honor just to get to chat with you guys a little bit today. And enjoy the rest of the summit. And if you want to learn more about polling place vote tripling, 15 p.m. Eastern, led by Alfredo. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. I guess quick question for the move on folks. I'm back. How do we end the session? Should I hit the stop on the record button? Is that what I should do? Should I make one of y'all hosts? I don't know what to do at this point.
I also do not know what to do, but I'm going to trust that you all as the experts know. So I think I'm going to leave the room, maybe, if that's a thing that I can do. But we will see you later on for our PPVT session.
Hopefully to see you all there. Bye, everybody. And thank you all so much for the kind words. We appreciate it.